So we've gotten a lot of questions about placing CTAK after Intacs. I've done now multiple cases where I've removed Intacs that patients didn't feel worked as well as they had hoped, and then placed a CTAK inlay in its place. And it works very, very well. The key with doing this is really incision planning. So if you look at the picture on the right, that blue mark there is where the old original Intacs incision remains and the scarring from that incision. Now, normally when I remove Intac segments, I make a new incision pretty much as close as I can to the Intac segment just to make my life easier. So once you do that, you really just need to do a limited dissection above and below the Intac segment, just enough to pretty much get your Sinskey hook through the opening of the segment, and usually you can then bring the segment out with a little bit of force. But in these cases, you're not going to be able to thread the CTAK inlay through these scarred incisions. So wherever you make this incision to remove the Intac segment is going to limit where you can place the CTAK inlay. So the first rule, if you're going to place CTAK segments after Intac's removal, is it's important to send the data to CorneaGen from your Pentacam before you ever remove the Intacs. Even though there might be some changes in the CTAK plan, some changes in the thicknesses that are recommended because the cornea is likely going to steepen and change somewhat in curvature when you remove the Intac segment, it will give you a rough idea of about how long the CTAK inlay is going to be and around where you want to be placing your incision. So in this case, you might want to really make sure to keep your incision close to the original incision, even though there is going to be more dissection, it is going to be a little more heartache to get the Intac segment out, but it is going to leave you more room to then place your CTAK inlay when the time comes and really get the CTAK effect. So this is the actual case of the plan to the left. And you can see here, I worked nasally because I really didn't want to limit the temporal placement of the CTAK inlay. So there was an original Intacs incision that was made nasally. My next incision was right next to that one to remove the Intacs segment. And now this actually left me enough room to make the incision that's recommended to place the inlay. And I still actually had room with the Zemer laser to create another incision inside of that and be able to still work very naturally, both pushing and pulling the inlay into position. I've also done this with the ability to create a 360-degree channel, so you don't have to create just this channel in the area of the CTAK inlay. But even if you create the 360-degree channel, you can't really bring the CTAK inlay through all those incisions. So it still works very well, and I've done it, but you still have to be mindful of where you're going to place your incisions so that you can place the CTAK inlay into position when the time comes. So here's a case that was actually sent to me with Intac's removal for potential CTAK. And this patient had an initial, the initial Intacs incision, which was placed temporally. And then there were two incisions that were placed right next to the superior and inferior Intacs segment temporally to remove the segments. And if this were my own case and CTAK wasn't a part of it, I would have done the exact same thing. That's the easiest way to remove them, and the easiest access is temporally to do it. So it makes sense to remove them this way. But you can see that if you have the CTAK plan beforehand and you want to place a CTAK inlay in this case, it's going to be really difficult now with these incisions because you can try to cut the inlay into two pieces, but you're really going to be left with a pretty substantial gap, which is and the gap is going to be temporal, which is likely going to affect your ability to get really a good result. And in this case, I actually felt that there was too many incisions here to be able to get a predictable result with CTAK, and I actually offered this patient topo-guided PRK, who fortunately did well. If you have the plan beforehand, you would then see that you could make your best bet is to make your incision nasally, either one incision and work both ways, or you could even make two incisions right against the intact segments nasally because you have a lot of gap there, and you'd still be able to place your CTAK inlay. And in this case, you could cut the inlay into two different segments and just place them as close as you could to that old incision scarring and get a good effect. So you can definitely do these cases. They just need a little bit more planning. And the real key is sending your data with the intact segment in place for proper incision planning. So these were the first few cases that I had done where I removed an intact segment, placed a CTAK inlay. And you can really see the effect of CTAK, especially on corrected vision. So these patients did much, much better with their CTAK inlays compared to the intact segment. So there's a lot of benefit to doing it. These patients were very, very happy with the CTAK result, just a little bit more planning involved.